She disappeared in 1997, and everyone believed she abandoned her family. But 14 years later, her son found a locked elevator to a floor that wasn't on any map. Behind that door, a scratched name, a hidden tape, and the truth that she never left. They erased her. Before we go forward, make sure you're subscribed, because this story changes everything. The elevator panel in St. Augustine General hadn't been updated since the mid-90s. Julian Reyes knew this because his key card jammed every third time he swiped it. A problem facilities management promised to fix 5 years ago. Tonight was no different. He tapped the side of the machine, shook his head, and slid the keycard again. A metallic beep. The light blinked green. B3. Archives. Restricted. The floor didn't technically exist. It wasn't in the hospital directory. No one listed it during orientation, but every hospital had them. Forgotten levels, basement wings closed off after budget cuts or asbestos scares. He'd only discovered B3 2 weeks ago when a janitor slipped and muttered, "Hope they didn't lock the records back down there." Julian had grown up in the hallways of this hospital. His mother, Teresa Reyes, had been a trauma nurse on the 4th floor until the day she disappeared in November 1997, right after a 12-hour shift. No note, no body, just gone. They'd told him she left voluntarily, that she couldn't handle single motherhood anymore, but he never believed that. She had walked him to school that morning, promised to take him to the arcade that weekend. She had left her coat behind, her purse, her car. And yet the official report said, no evidence of foul play. The elevator groaned as it descended deeper than any level Julian had visited in his 6 months as a night shift tech. The lights flickered once, then twice. He adjusted his flashlight in his belt. Old buildings breathed differently at night. The hallways sighed, vents moaned, machinery whispered just beneath the edge of hearing. The elevator dinged. When the doors slid open, a gust of stale air rushed in, dry, cold, and slightly metallic, like the scent of locked filing cabinets and bleach. Julian hesitated before stepping out. The corridor ahead was narrow, poorly lit. Fluorescent panels buzzed above. Pipes snaked along the ceiling like exposed veins. This wasn't just storage. There were doors on either side, heavy, windowless ones, each marked only by a room number, no signs, no lab, no records, just labels like B3-17, B3-18, painted in fading black stencils. He glanced down at the map he'd found in a disused HR drawer, a photocopy dated 1992. On it, B3-21 was labeled transfer holding, but his breath caught when he saw what was next to it. B322, Nurse Teresa Reyes, last logged entry, November 18, 1997. He followed the corridor slowly. Dust coated the edges of the floor. The air was silent, oppressively so, as if the very walls were listening. Then came the door. B3-22. Julian's hand trembled slightly as he reached for the handle. It was cold. Locked. Of course. He stepped back and reached for his badge again, heart thudding, swiped. Nothing. He tried again. Still nothing. The light remained red. Then a sound. Software mechanical, almost like a whisper of a door sliding shut deeper down the corridor. He turned. Nothing. Just rats, he muttered aloud. But his voice didn't echo. He moved forward instead, toward B3-21, testing the knob. It opened with a click. A soft glow bathed the room. Inside, a small desk, 2 chairs, an ancient filing cabinet, and in the far corner, a security monitor. He stepped in. The monitor was still plugged in. Its screen crackled, faint static humming. One feed was still live. It showed an empty hospital hallway. Not this one, but familiar. Then a figure stepped into frame. A woman, wearing scrubs, walking past a row of closed doors. Her face turned toward the camera, just briefly, but it was enough. Julian froze. It was his mother, younger than he remembered. Her hair longer, tucked under her nurse's cap. Her face drawn in worry. And the timestamp? November 18, 1997. 9:42 p.m., 30 minutes after her last recorded shift. 16 minutes before she supposedly left of her own free will. Julian stumbled back, heart pounding. The screen went black. He stood in silence for a long moment. Then, slowly, from behind him, a soft click. The door to room B322 had opened. The door to B3-22 creaked open just enough to reveal blackness beyond. Julian didn't move. His flashlight remained clipped to his belt, but he didn't reach for it. Instead, he stared at the open door, pulse roaring in his ears. He wanted to believe this was a glitch, a vacuum shift, a faulty latch releasing after years of tension. But deep down, he knew better. There was a presence in the corridor now. Not a person, not even a sound, just a pressure, like the air had grown thicker, denser. Julian reached slowly for his light. A soft click. The beam lit up the open doorway. Dust particles floated in the air. The room beyond was small, no bigger than a walk-in supply closet. But this wasn't a storage space. On the wall, a hospital bed sat folded up against a metal bracket. Restraints dangled from the side. A single chair faced the bed. Beside it, a clipboard, yellowed, curled at the corners, hung from a rusted hook. He stepped inside. The light flickered. The air was frigid. He read the clipboard. Subject, Teresa Reyes. Assigned room, B322, observation notes, November 17, 1997. Dr. H. Kettering. Patient exhibits confusion and agitation. Expressed fear of being taken again. Recommends sedation and transfer off active floors. Clearance obtained from admin. Julian blinked. Taken again? Sedated? Transferred ? There was no record in his mother's medical files. Nothing in the hospital reports. Officially, her last known action was signing out at the end of her shift. But this note, dated one day before she disappeared, placed her inside this room. Another page was partially torn and stapled beneath it. Subject still refuses to admit prior treatment. Claims entire floor was created for vanishing patients. Maybe referencing B4 level operations, now decommissioned. Urgent need to isolate. He stepped back from the clipboard, bile rising in his throat. Vanishing patients. His mother had known, had suspected, had spoken, and they'd buried her for it. Julian turned and left the room, pulling the door shut behind him. As he did, a piece of metal near the base caught his eye, a nameplate, partially painted over. He knelt down and rubbed at the flaking paint with his sleeve. Decontamination hold. B3. This wasn't a patient room. It was a containment unit. He didn't belong here. Not alone. Not without a team. Not without... A voice interrupted his thoughts. Didn't think anyone even knew this wing still had power. Julian spun. A man stood at the corridor's end, lean, mid-60s, wearing an old maintenance uniform. His ID badge hung at his hip, flipped backward. His hair was gray, thin, buzzed close to the scalp. His eyes, sharp and watchful, locked onto Julian like he was a trespasser. Julian's hand went to his side instinctively, gripping the flashlight tighter. The man didn't move. He just said, "You must be Reyes's boy." Julian felt his breath hitch. "You knew her?" The man gave a slow nod. "Knew of her. I wasn't medical staff. I was down here. Systems maintenance, electric, climate. What was left of it anyway?" "What is this place?" Julian demanded. "Why does it still have active feeds? Why's my mother's name?" "She was the last." The man's voice cracked. The last one to try and blow the whistle. Silence fell. Julian stepped closer. "What happened here?" The man sighed and leaned against the wall, as though the weight of the answer was heavier than he could carry. They called it internal patient routing. Back in the 80s and early 90s, patients who weren't responding to treatment, who couldn't pay, or who knew too much, they were moved down here. Isolated. Legally, they didn't exist anymore, not in the system. That's insane. The man nodded once. And your mom? She started asking questions. One day she came down here alone, probably thinking she could find evidence. He looked away. She never came back up. Julian felt his stomach twist. I was the one who locked the floor, the man said quietly. Back then, I thought I was just doing my job, sealing off unused wings. I didn't know someone was still inside. Julian's voice dropped. But she was. Yes. The man's gaze dropped to the ground. And I've lived with that for 26 years. A long pause. Why are you telling me this now? Because I saw your name on the tech roster last week, the man said. And I knew you'd come. Just like she did. Looking for truth in a place built to bury it. Julian stared at him. There's more, the man said, pulling a key ring from his pocket. A room at the far end of the hall. B330. They used to call it transition ops. That's where the files went, before the shredders. If there's anything left of her, it'll be in there. He tossed the keys to Julian, who caught them reflexively. But you didn't hear it from me, the man added, and turned to walk away. Wait, Julian called out. The man didn't stop. Who are you? He paused, looked back over his shoulder. My name doesn't matter, he said. But I locked the floor, and you're going to be the one who opens it. The keys in Julian's hand felt old. Brass tarnished with time. No labels, no tags. Just 6 teeth worn from decades of use. He stood alone in the corridor outside room B3-22, the darkness around him deepening. The elevator had stopped making noise a while ago. He hadn't even noticed. Down here, time warped. The stillness grew thick. B330. He turned the flashlight down the hallway. The numbers ticked forward one door at a time. He passed B323, then B324. Each sealed tight, undisturbed. A few had rusted hinges. One was marked with faint scratches, almost claw-like. His breathing grew shallow the closer he got. B330 was at the far end, partially obscured by a leaning metal cart and an overturned linen bin. As he approached, he saw someone had once taped a paper sign to it. It was long rotted and illegible, but beneath the tape marks, black marker had bled through. 2 faded words, "Do not enter." He crouched, shifted the cart aside, and tried the door. Locked, of course. Julian slid one of the keys into the lock. It didn't fit. The second clicked but wouldn't turn. The third resisted halfway, then gave way with a reluctant clunk. The door opened an inch, then caught. He shoved harder. A low groan echoed through the corridor as the door scraped against the floor. The scent that greeted him was overpowering. Paper rot, metal, something sterile, and something else, like dried blood and ammonia. He stepped in. The flashlight's beam revealed rows of old filing cabinets, dented metal desks, and several outdated terminals, CRT monitors with cracked screens and detached keyboards. Folders lay strewn across the floor. Many were water-damaged. Others remained sealed with rusted clips. Julian's fingers trembled slightly as he stepped deeper into the room. This was it. The place where people disappeared twice. Once in the system, and again in reality. He walked along the rows, scanning the cabinets. Each was labeled by code, INT-R3, DISP-A1, HOLD-X7. None of it made sense. No names, just codes. Then he found it. Near the back of the room, taped to a drawer. Final transfers, 1997. He yanked it open. The folder inside was thin. Only 4 files, each tab marked in red. He flipped through the first, a man named Henry Dillard. Status, Transmission complete. Subject non-responsive. Relocation approved. It was signed off by Admin Director H. Kettering. The second was a female patient, Agnes Mulroney, flagged for transfer due to disruptive pattern behavior and refusal to comply with treatment protocols. The third was blank. No name, no notes. Just a black stamp, removed. And the fourth, his mother's. He froze. Teresa Reyes. RN staff identification. Number 4812, date of entry, November 17, 1997. Action initiated, hold and assessment transfer. Classification 03A-R/witness detainment. Julian's chest tightened. There were notes. Subject overheard debrief related to B4 protocol. Exhibited clear memory of events. Attempted to question superior. Sent to B322 for interim hold. Pending erasure or relocation. Clearance ordered. Override code RA-K. HK erasure. Relocation. His mother had been a witness. Not a patient, not a danger, a liability. He turned the page. A second sheet. Shorter. A checklist of internal movements. Someone had initialed a transfer to B4, the floor below this one. He didn't even know a B4 existed. He turned to leave, clutching the file, when his flashlight caught something taped to the underside of a desk. A photograph. He reached for it. The tape peeled away with a brittle crack. The photo came free. It was grainy, black and white, but unmistakable. His mother, in scrubs. Standing in a hallway that wasn't B3. There was a faint B4 stenciled on the wall behind her. She wasn't alone. 3 other individuals were in the frame, one slumped in a chair, another standing in the shadows, and the third partially blurred near a metal gurney. Julian stared at the image. At the bottom of the photo, someone had written in faint pencil, "She wasn't supposed to remember." Suddenly his flashlight sputtered. He smacked it once, twice. It went out. Darkness swallowed the room. Julian reached for his phone. No service. He turned toward the door, but it was closed. He hadn't closed it. He rushed forward, pulling the handle. Locked. Panic surged. He jiggled all the keys in the lock. None worked. He banged on the door. "Hello?" he shouted. "Is anyone out there?" Silence, then a whisper. It came from behind him. Low, murmured. "Female." Julian turned slowly, heart in his throat. He whispered, "Mom?" Nothing. Then, a click. The old monitor in the far corner of the room blinked to life. Grainy footage. A hospital hallway again, B4. A figure walked past the camera, hunched, slow. Another followed. Then a nurse, her back to the camera. Then she turned her head just slightly. Julian dropped the flashlight. It was his mother, her face pale, blank. She walked straight up to the lens, as if staring right at him, and whispered something. But there was no sound. Just a silent screen. And then it cut to black. The lights flickered back on. The door behind him creaked open. Julian turned slowly. No one there. Just the dark hallway, and the sound of distant breathing, steady and low, coming from somewhere beyond. Julian didn't sleep. He couldn't. Even after he made it back to the elevator, after the door to B3 creaked shut behind him, and the weight of the silence was replaced by the dull hum of ascending floors, he couldn't shake the feeling that something had seen him, or worse, recognized him. He spent the rest of the night in the staff break room, the manila folder sitting on the table in front of him like a live wire. Every time he opened it, the words burned deeper. Witness detainment, erasure, relocation. The fact that a floor even beneath B3 existed had never been publicly acknowledged. Not on any map. Not in any official system records. Even in construction logs, B3 was the final structural depth. Anything deeper was intentional omission. By morning, he knew what he had to do. Julian showed up outside the facility's office just after 8 a.m. He hadn't showered. His shirt was wrinkled, his eyes bloodshot. The secretary behind the desk, Rebecca, he thought her name was, looked up with a raised brow. "You look like hell. I need to see records, blueprints, structural files from the 1990s. She blinked. "Do you have clearance?" "Number, but I have reason." He held up the file like it was a badge. She didn't glance at the details, just the age of the paper and the expression on his face. "Wait here." 5 minutes later, he was in the basement records room with a man named Cal, a retired engineer who now only came in twice a week to keep his mind moving. Cal was in his 70s, sharp as ever, and wore the same kind of work shirt Julian's dad used to wear. No logo, just a breast pocket with a pen clipped in. "You say B4, he muttered, rifling through a metal drawer. "That's a ghost level." "You've heard of it?" Cal grunted. "Sure. We poured it in 1982. Never activated it. Rumor was it was going to be for high-risk isolation. Patients nobody wanted on the main floors. But that was before funding dried up. And then..." He trailed off, pulling out a rolled blueprint sealed in a plastic sleeve. "Then they covered it." He laid it out on the table. Julian leaned over it. The hospital's structural plan looked like a cross-section of a layered cake. Basement, B1, B2, B3. Then, below that, faint pencil lines, B4, no official label, no stamps, no door access points, just hallways, 2 rooms, a stairwell, and in the center, a square marked Subhold C, audio closed loop. "What's that mean?" Julian asked, tapping the label. Cal exhaled. "That was the sound isolation chamber. They built it to contain patients who were considered dangerous or unstable. It wasn't about curing. It was about silencing." Julian went cold. "Access?" Cal pointed to a shaft that ran down from B3. "Old mechanical lift, caged, not connected to the main elevators. You'd need the manual key, which, if it still exists, is probably in admin storage or with one of the old facilities guys." "Like who?" Cal shrugged. "I'm the last one left, far as I know." Back upstairs, Julian bypassed the admin floor and made his way instead to the chapel. He wasn't religious, but his mother had been. Always. When he was young, she used to sit in the back pew and pray before every shift. Not long prayers, just silent stillness. Head bowed, hands folded. Now, alone in the chapel, Julian sat in the same pew she used to choose. The air was cold. The stained glass above cast blue and crimson patterns across the pews. He whispered aloud, "Why didn't anyone help you?" He wasn't asking God, he was asking her. There was no answer. But as he sat there, his mind replayed her face on that monitor, blank, distant, staring past the lens. And then, her whisper. No sound, but definite speech. He pulled out the photo from the folder again. Her expression, even in grayscale, wasn't just dazed. It was afraid. She hadn't just been transferred. She had been disappeared. It took Julian 2 hours to find the old mechanical lift shaft mentioned in the blueprints. It was tucked behind a wall panel in a disused section of B2, where the walls hadn't been painted in years and the ceiling tiles hung like tired eyelids. The keyhole was there, rust-ringed, faintly marked with red paint that had long since flaked away. He didn't have the key, but the man who once locked the floor might. That night, Julian returned to the same hallway outside B3. He waited. The corridor remained still. No voices, no footsteps. But eventually, just past 1 a.m., he heard the faint grind of wheels, a maintenance cart, and the soft click of boots. The older man reappeared. This time, he didn't look surprised. "I figured you'd come back," he said. Julian held up the blueprint. "I found the shaft." The man gave a sad smile. "You want the key?" Julian nodded. "You're going to go down there alone?" "If that's what it takes." The man didn't answer right away. Then he pulled out his wallet and slid out a small metal key taped behind a photo. "Key to the lift," he said. "I never turned it in. Figured someone might need it someday." Julian took it with reverence. "You might find things you don't want to see," the man warned. "That floor, they didn't just erase patients, they experimented. Emotional suppression, audio confinement, no light, no sound, nothing but themselves and their memories." Julian stared at him. "Why did you stay here all these years?" The man's face twisted with guilt. "Because I helped build the cage." Julian stood before the old service shaft at 2:17 a.m. The hospital had settled into its graveyard rhythm, the low thrum of HVAC, a nurse's cart squeaking 3 floors up, the occasional faraway beep of a monitor. The sterile calm of a building that never truly slept. This hallway, though, was different. Cut off, unclean, like time had folded here, a place the rest of the hospital forgot on purpose. The panel had no buttons, just the keyhole and a narrow seam where the metal gate once slid open. Julian reached into his pocket, fingers curling around the cold, notched key the old maintenance man had given him. He inserted it into the lock. Click. A quiet mechanical noise stirred behind the wall. Gears, dusty from neglect, shuddered to life. The panel vibrated softly. Then the door groaned open. Behind it was a narrow cage lift, just large enough for one person, floor grated, sides rusted. It smelled of oil and mildew. He hesitated, then stepped inside. The lift trembled as it began to descend. No buttons, no lights, just a slow, rattling descent through a shaft lined with shadows. As he dropped lower, the air grew colder, moist, like descending into a cavern. The elevator jolted to a stop. A few seconds passed. Then the gate slid open. B4. The number was scrawled faintly on the wall across from the lift in faded red chalk. Nothing official, just 3 crooked characters. B4. The corridor ahead was tight, damp, lit only by emergency strips along the floor. They flickered dimly, like dying fireflies. The hallway sloped slightly downward, and everything about it felt wrong, like it hadn't just been buried, but intentionally erased. Pipes ran like ribs along the walls. A broken gurney lay overturned on the side. One wheel still spun. Julian moved slowly, keeping his flashlight low. To his right, a viewing panel had been smashed. Through it, he glimpsed a room filled with rusted chairs bolted to the floor, facing a white wall. No windows, no sound system, just silence and structure. Audio closed loop, he remembered from the blueprint. This was a place designed not to hold people, but to erase them. He continued forward. At the end of the corridor was a sealed steel door. A camera above it had been ripped from the wall. Wires dangled like veins. Julian tried the door. It opened. The room beyond was large, maybe 40 feet across. No furniture except for an old hospital bed, bolted into the floor, and a chair beside it. Mounted to the wall was a speaker, long inactive, and opposite the bed, a mirror, 2-way, cracked in the upper corner. He stepped inside, heart pounding, and saw her name, Teresa Reyes, etched into the wall beside the bed in faint scratches, as if carved with a spoon or fingernails. Beneath it, more markings. I remember, I remember, I remember, over and over. He ran his hand over the wall. The etching was real. She'd been here. Suddenly his flashlight flickered. He banged it once. The light snapped off completely. He stood in darkness. Then, a click. The overhead light flared on. Old fluorescence buzzed, casting a sickly white wash across the room. Behind him, something moved. He turned. The mirror was glowing. No, backlit. Someone was in the observation room on the other side. A figure stepped forward. Slim, female, in a long hospital gown. Gray-streaked hair pulled behind her ears. Her face, shadowed, but familiar. Julian's heart skipped. He stepped toward the mirror. "Mom?" he whispered. The figure moved closer, face half lit now. Older, but it was her, Teresa Reyes. She stared at him through the glass. No smile, no recognition, just stillness. Julian pressed his hand against the mirror. "I'm here," he said. "I found you." She didn't move. Then slowly, she raised her hand and mimicked the motion, palm to glass, fingers matching his. But her expression remained blank. Hollow. She mouthed something. Julian stared. 3 words. "They're still here." Suddenly the lights cut out again. The mirror went dark. Julian stumbled back. Footsteps. Outside the room, fast, heavy. He turned toward the door. A shape moved past the window, then another. He reached for the doorknob. Locked. A whisper passed through the room, not his mother's voice. Male. Low. "You shouldn't be here." Julian backed away, heart thudding, then slam! The door burst open. A beam of light hit his eyes. "Hands up!" He froze. A voice barked again, firmer. "Get down now!" It was security. Later, in a brightly lit administrative room on the 2nd floor, Julian sat across from 2 hospital board members and Detective Ava Morgan from the local precinct. He told them everything. The files, the lift, the name etched into the wall, the mirror. He thought they wouldn't believe him. But when he pulled out the folder, the blueprint, the photograph, Detective Morgan grew still. "I've seen this name before," she murmured. "Teresa Reyes. Your mother disappeared in '97, Julian nodded. "They said she ran away." The detective glanced at the others. "We reopened 3 missing persons cases from the same era last year. All were hospital staff, all dead ends. But your mother's file had inconsistencies." The board chair leaned back. "Mr. Reyes, what you're suggesting—" "I'm not suggesting anything," Julian interrupted. "I saw her. She's alive. Or she was, until they took her away again." Detective Morgan held up the photo he'd found. "I want a forensic team in that sub-level, immediately." The board members exchanged wary glances. "We'll cooperate," one said reluctantly. "To a point." Morgan's jaw tightened. "We'll see about that." The next day, Julian wasn't allowed back into the hospital. Detective Ava Morgan had warned him gently but firmly, "Let us handle it from here." He'd spent the night in a motel near the river, unable to sleep, staring at the ceiling while replaying the moment his mother raised her hand to the glass. The shape of her eyes, the tilt of her head. "They're still here." That was what she mouthed. Not, "Help me," not, "I'm alive." She had warned him. By morning, he was pacing the motel room when his phone lit up. Unknown number. He answered instantly. "Mr. Reyes," the voice said. "This is Ava Morgan. We found something." Detective Morgan met him in the staff entrance parking lot, dressed in plain clothes but clearly in charge. With her were 2 crime scene techs and a heavy plastic evidence container. "No press yet," she said. "No one else on the board knows either. We entered B4 under the pretense of an HVAC inspection." Julian glanced at the box. "What's in there?" The detective opened the lid and removed a sealed plastic pouch. Inside was a small, weather-warped cassette tape, labeled T. Reyes, Observation Room, November, 1997. "And this," she added, pulling out a second bag. Julian took it carefully. A folded page, ripped from a notebook. Inside, written in his mother's script, were just 3 lines. "If someone finds this, I was never sick. I was never dangerous. I knew too much. They made me disappear." Beneath it, a crude drawing of the floor plan. One room was circled, and in the margins, a note. Wall, left of mirror, behind outlet. They didn't find it. Morgan handed him a photo. The room from the drawing room. The same one Julian had entered. Crime scene lights now illuminated the area. "There was a hollow space," she explained, "taped behind the outlet." Julian exhaled. She hid it. She did more than that, Morgan said. We found a series of these messages, hidden in layers, all placed with intention, as if she knew someone, someday, would come. Back at the precinct, a forensics tech played the cassette in a secure audio room. Julian sat behind glass, listening. The tape began with static, then breathing, then a woman's voice. His mother's voice. Day unknown. I don't know if anyone will ever hear this. They told me I'd been reassigned. But the doors never opened. They sedated me. I think they're testing something. I can't remember what day it is. The lights stay on. Always. I haven't slept. Another pause. I'm writing notes, hiding them. They said I was unstable, that I made things up. I didn't. I saw the file. The one with the transfers. The real one. There were 5 others. I remember their names. Julian leaned forward. We were supposed to forget. That was the experiment. Not just isolation, erasure. They tested soundproofing, deprivation, how long a person can stay silent before they believe the silence. The voice cracked. But I remember. I still remember. Then a whisper. They'll come again soon. If I don't wake up tomorrow, tell Julian I never left him. I never would have left. Click. Silence. Julian sat motionless. The room seemed to fold in on itself. His ears rang. His chest was a vice. The detective placed a hand on the glass between them. I'm sorry, she said softly. But Julian wasn't crying. He was sharpening. Later that afternoon, Morgan gave a press briefing. Controlled. Vague. The hospital board insisted on secrecy. But the discovery of a sealed floor and archival evidence of unlawful isolation was impossible to contain. Julian stood outside the hospital, holding his mother's written note in his hand, while camera crews gathered just beyond the restricted zone. An older nurse passed him by and paused. You're Teresa's son. He turned. She nodded. I was a floater back then. Helped in trauma sometimes. Your mother was kind. She brought me a blanket once when I fainted during a double shift. Julian gave a tired smile. She did that a lot. The nurse hesitated. She wasn't the only one they buried. Then walked away. That night, Julian sat in his car outside the hospital, staring at the building he'd once run through as a child, while his mother charted late-night vitals. The wind shook the bare trees. Snow flurried sideways in the lot's edge lights. His phone buzzed. A text from Ava Morgan. She's not in any of the recovered rooms. No body, no trace. Julian stared at the screen, then typed back. She's still alive. He didn't know how he knew. He just did. She had looked at him, recognized him, warned him. They're still here. He started the car and pulled out of the lot. Whatever had happened in B4 wasn't over, and he wasn't done searching. By the time Julian got back into the hospital, the corridors of B4 had changed. What had once been silent was now crawling with activity. Evidence markers, portable lights, officers in protective suits moving with cautious precision. The elevator shaft had been rigged with temporary power, and yellow tape crisscrossed each hallway. But Julian didn't care about procedure anymore. Not now, because while the forensic team searched the containment rooms and side corridors, no one had checked the door farthest from the lift, the one listed on Teresa's sketch as B4-6, the one labeled only with a scratched X. He found the door half covered in a rusted shelving unit. No one had touched it. Julian dragged the shelf aside. The metal screeched across the floor. He tested the knob. Unlocked. The door opened with a breathless sigh. Inside was darkness, the kind that pressed against skin. He turned on his flashlight and stepped inside. Room B4-6 had no bed, no chair, just concrete walls, a low ceiling, and a rectangular vent at the far end. The room felt wrong, as if it hadn't been built, but sealed, a tomb more than a chamber. Julian swept the light across the walls. Etchings, hundreds of them, names, dates, sentences scratched by hand. Don't forget your name. They watch through the mirror. If you're reading this, speak her name aloud. And at the center of the back wall, written in red marker, faded but still visible, Julian. I remember, I remember, I remember. Julian's hand trembled. It wasn't just a message. It was for him. His name written on a wall that hadn't been opened in over 2 decades. He dropped to his knees and ran his fingers over it. The marker had bled slightly into the concrete, but the letters were sharp, urgent. She had written this. She had survived long enough to do so. Then something else caught his eye. In the vent. He crawled forward, reached in. His fingers closed around something wrapped in plastic. He pulled it free. Another cassette. And this time, taped to it. A photograph. His mother, much older. Gray hair, same gown, standing in this very room. Her hand pressed against the wall, a solemn expression on her face. The back of the photo had a note. They never stopped. Not after me. There are more. Find the others. Save them. T. Back upstairs, Detective Morgan played the second tape behind closed doors. Julian sat across from her, heart pounding. The recording began more distorted than the first. Static. Then a faint hum. Then her voice. I don't know what day it is. The lights don't come on anymore. I hear them talking through the vents. I know they're still here. The others were taken one by one. I was the last. But I fought too long, so they sealed me away. They'll deny everything. They'll say I left. They'll say I was unstable. That's the word they like to use. Unstable. She gave a weak laugh, dry, tired. But unstable people don't leave messages. They don't remember dates. They don't hide tapes. Julian, if you find this... Julian held his breath. Don't let them erase me again. Don't let them erase anyone. Then silence, followed by a soft whisper. They whisper at night. Behind the walls, still moving, still watching. The tape clicked. Julian sat back, throat tight. Detective Morgan turned off the player and looked at him. This wasn't a one-off, she said quietly. He nodded. She said there were more. Morgan hesitated. Julian, no body, no remains. It's possible your mother... She's alive. You don't know that. She left me a map, a tape, a photo. She knew someone would come. That means she believed there was still a way out. Morgan didn't respond right away. Then she leaned forward. Then let's find it. That night, Julian returned to B4 one last time, alone. He knew he shouldn't. But he needed to stand in room B4-6 again, without the noise, without the lights. He stood in the center and whispered her name. Mom! Silence. Then, behind the wall, a creak. He spun. A gust of cold air slipped through the vent. And something else. A whisper. Julian. Soft, faint, but real. He stepped toward the vent, flashlight aimed. No movement, just shadows. But the whisper had said his name. He wasn't alone. Julian stood frozen in front of the vent. The whisper had faded, swallowed by the concrete silence of B4. But he was certain someone had said his name. It wasn't the wind, not his imagination. He'd lived with echoes of hope for 14 years, and this was different. This was presence. This was real. He stepped closer to the vent, shining his flashlight down into the duct. Nothing but metal shadows and dust. Then, movement. A shadow flickered just out of view. A ripple across the far grate. Hello? He called. Is someone there? No response. But something lingered in the air now. A faint vibration, like the hum of machinery buried deep underground. He turned back toward the door of room B4-6, suddenly uneasy. And then he heard it. Ding. The elevator. Julian's blood ran cold. No one else was supposed to be here. He stepped into the hallway just in time to see the cage lift at the end of the corridor slide open. It was empty. No one stood inside. but the lights above it glowed a deep amber, and on the ground were footprints, wet, bare, leading out of the lift and into the hallway, as if someone had stepped out dripping from water or condensation. Julian followed them. They led down the corridor, past containment rooms, past security camera shells, past the crime scene markers, and then stopped at a locked utility door labeled B4-Mech. He knelt down. Faint scratches marked the floor near the threshold. The door had been opened recently. He tried the knob. Locked. He stepped back, turned to head upstairs for a tool, and heard the elevator move again. The gate slammed shut. He sprinted back down the corridor. The lift was rising, fast. Julian slammed the call button. Nothing. The gears groaned high above. He looked up the shaft and saw something that made him stagger back. Another level. Above B3, but unlit. Unlabeled. Just a floor. No number. The elevator was heading there. He ran to the blueprints tucked in his jacket, unfurled them against the wall. No such level existed. B4, B3, B2. But there, scratched faintly into the side margin in pencil, nearly erased, B3-Alt, black level. Back upstairs, Julian burst into the precinct's side office where Detective Morgan was finalizing the transcript of Teresa's second tape. She looked up, startled. "I heard something," he said. "And the elevator moved. No one called it." She narrowed her eyes. "Did you see who was inside?" "No one, but it stopped on a level that's not in any official file." He dropped the blueprints onto her desk and pointed to the faint pencil marks. B3-Alt, black level. Someone scratched this in years ago and tried to erase it. Morgan scanned it, then said, "We need to get clearance to follow it up." "No," Julian said. "If we ask for permission, it'll vanish again. This level, it's active. Whoever's behind this is still using it." Morgan looked at him, weighing the risk, then nodded. An hour later, dressed in unmarked scrubs and with a security override card courtesy of Morgan's contact in internal affairs, Julian entered the elevator shaft control room on B2. From here, they could access the backup manual override, allowing them to control the old freight elevator's floor targets. "Which one's the alt level?" Morgan asked. Julian pointed to a tiny dial, worn to the metal. Just above the B3 setting was a notch. Unmarked. "Try it." Morgan hesitated, then flipped the switch. They returned to the elevator. Inside, Julian pressed the new setting. The lift groaned to life and began to rise. Past B4, past B3. Then slowed. The cage opened. The black level. The corridor beyond was unlike the others. Smoother, newer, almost surgical. Fluorescent lights lined the ceiling but dimmed, only half functional. The floor was tile but polished. No dust, no debris. Morgan stepped out beside Julian, hand hovering near her sidearm. "This wasn't abandoned," she whispered. "This was hidden." They moved slowly. The hallway forked ahead. One path to the left, marked Data Control. The other to the right, Re-entry. They chose the right. The corridor ended at a heavy security door, propped open with a broken floor sign. Inside were rows of medical lockers, charts, clean gowns, bags labeled by number, not name, and at the center, a chair, a medical chair with wrist restraints. On the wall above it, a monitor glowed softly. Julian approached. The screen flickered. A grainy recording played. Not surveillance. Training footage. A voiceover. Patients moved from B4 to black level must undergo pre-release conditioning. Vocal restriction recommended. Full memory suppression as per protocol 92. A. The camera cut to a figure seated in the chair. Her face turned slowly. It was Teresa Reyes. A line of text below the video read, "Subject 0417-RE. Status, successful redirect." Julian's knees buckled. Morgan caught him by the arm. She was here. He nodded. They erased her, changed her identity. Morgan looked back at the screen. The timestamp? 2002, 5 years after her disappearance. She's alive, Julian said. She got out. Morgan didn't speak. She only reached for her radio. Julian couldn't stop staring at the screen. His mother's face flickered in and out of focus, recorded on grainy black and white footage over 2 decades ago, strapped to a chair like a patient in a psychiatric hold. Her eyes were open, but empty, her mouth slightly ajar, as if she were trying to speak but had forgotten how. Status: successful redirect. What does that mean? He asked hoarsely. Detective Morgan didn't answer right away. She was already moving, snapping pictures with her phone, checking drawers, pulling files from behind the control console. The medical locker beside the chair creaked as she opened it. Inside were rows of file folders, each one labeled with subject numbers instead of names. 0417, she muttered, flipping through. She found it, a plain brown file. She handed it to Julian. He hesitated, then opened it. Subject: 0417-RE name. Redacted, former identity: Teresa Reyes, unconfirmed. Admittance. Date: November 1997, black level transfer date. April 2001, processing notes. Subject displayed resistance to primary sedation. High memory retention, required multiple cycles. Exposure to loop audio therapy unsuccessful. Recommendation: reconditioning. Implantation of alternate history. Memory partition achieved on cycle 4. Behavior: docile, compliant. Prepared for external reintegration. Final line: handwritten. Subject reassigned under new identity. No family contact permitted. File closed. Julian felt the folder tremble in his hands. They reprogrammed her, he whispered. Erased everything, gave her a new name, a new life. Morgan leaned over his shoulder, her expression unreadable. You ever hear of Project Eden? Julian shook his head. Late 80s, she explained. Black budget research into behavior modulation. Started in military psych units, then quietly moved into civilian infrastructure. Hospitals, rehab centers, institutions that no one questions. Julian looked up sharply. You're saying this was part of that? She nodded once. The files we found in B4 match early Eden structures, loop therapy, controlled silence, erasure via sensory deprivation. It was all Eden doctrine. Julian's throat tightened. They took people who saw too much, Morgan continued, and made them forget or vanish. And my mom, she was one of the few who fought back long enough to leave a message. They gathered the evidence, the file, the footage, the list of subject codes in the cabinet, over 100, dating from 1994 to 2006. As Morgan packed it up, Julian noticed something tucked between the wall and the locker. A photo. He pulled it free. It was worn, creased, but clearly recent. His mother, standing in front of a garden, gray hair pulled back, smiling faintly. The back read, Elizabeth R. Facility 42. Status monitored, stable. Elizabeth R., he murmured. Morgan leaned over. That could be her new name. Hours later, back at the precinct, Julian sat across from a DHS liaison, Morgan at his side. They laid everything out. The black level, the erased files, the footage, and the photograph. The woman, Agent Tillman, was quiet throughout the meeting. When Julian finished speaking, she simply said, You've uncovered a containment failure. Julian blinked. What does that mean? Someone escaped a protocol built to be permanent. Someone, Julian said. That's my mother. Tillman folded her hands. Then you should know the truth. These people were never supposed to return to society, not without clearance. You say she left messages, that she remembers. She does. Then she's a liability. Julian stood up. She's a person. She survived 20 years of imprisonment, erasure, abuse. Morgan stepped in. If we found her location— I already have it, Tillman interrupted. Facility 42 is a long-term care center operated under a private wellness contract. Low visibility. She's been stable for nearly a decade. You knew? Julian asked, stunned. All this time? She was monitored. No activity, no risk, until now. Julian clenched his fists. I want to see her. That's not your decision. She's my mother, Tillman sighed. There's an emergency hearing this evening. The board will vote. If she's ruled safe for contact, you'll be granted supervised visitation. Julian looked to Morgan. She gave a slight nod. I'll back you. That night, in the waiting room of the municipal courthouse, Julian stared at the floor as voices argued behind the closed chamber doors. Morgan sat beside him. I spent 10 years tracking missing persons for cold case reviews, she said quietly. I've never seen anyone claw their way back into the light like your mom did. Julian didn't reply. He just clutched the photograph of Elizabeth R. Then the door opened. A woman in a black blazer stepped out. They've approved it. Julian stood, legs weak. Where is she? The woman handed him a form. Facility 42, 3 hours north. You'll be escorted there at 9 a.m. He barely slept. At dawn, he packed the photo, the tapes, her file. He wanted to bring proof, to show her that he remembered too, and that she hadn't disappeared. Not anymore. Julian watched the sun rise through the tinted window of the government SUV. The road unfurled before them like a ribbon of pale light, cutting through pine trees and open hills. Detective Morgan sat beside him in silence, reviewing her notes, her badge clipped discreetly beneath her jacket. Behind them sat Agent Tillman, her expression unreadable, tablet in hand. No one spoke, not until the first sign appeared. Willow Heights Recovery Center, Private Entrance Facility 42. It didn't look like a government site. No barbed wire, no armed guards. Just a long white building tucked behind a gate, wrapped in stillness and painted with flowers that looked too cheerful for the weight they were about to bring. Julian stepped out of the vehicle. The air was cool, spring heavy. A breeze swept through the parking lot, stirring the paper in his hand, the visitation form. He followed Tillman and Morgan up the stone path. His footsteps felt distant, detached, as if his mind hadn't caught up with his body, as if the boy he had been, the one waiting for his mother to come home, was still years behind him, sitting at the dinner table with a plate growing cold. Inside, the receptionist barely looked up. Room 9, East Wing, end of the hall. Julian nodded, barely hearing her. The hallway was bright, too bright. Soft pastel paintings lined the walls, gardens, birds, faces smiling without names. Each door was numbered. Room 5, Room 6, Room 7. He stopped in front of Room 9. His hand trembled as it reached for the knob. Morgan touched his shoulder. You don't have to rush. But Julian didn't hesitate. He opened the door. The room was small, simple. A bed, a chair, a single window overlooking a flower bed in bloom. And there, sitting in the chair by the window, was a woman. Her back was to the door, gray hair, a pale blue sweater. She was watching birds gather at a feeder beyond the glass. Julian stepped inside, his breath caught in his throat. Mom? He said. She didn't turn. Morgan and Tillman stood back. Julian took a step closer, then another. Teresa, he tried again, his voice soft. It's me, Julian. At that, she slowly turned her head. Her eyes met his. They were the same eyes, familiar, tired, but no flicker of recognition crossed her face. She blinked once, twice, then offered a polite smile. Hello, she said gently. Do I know you? Julian felt the breath leave his lungs. I'm your son. Her smile didn't falter, but it didn't change either. I don't think so, she said, searching his face. I don't remember having children. He swallowed hard. You do. You had 5. I'm the oldest. Julian. You used to call me Jules. She shook her head slowly. I'm sorry. Julian sat down in the chair opposite hers. He opened the bag he'd brought, laid out the photograph from her hospital locker, the tapes, the file marked 0417-RE, and finally, her handwritten note. She picked it up, puzzled. As she read, her fingers twitched slightly. Her lips parted. Something flickered behind her eyes. A pulse of something old and buried. She looked at the photo again. Where did you get this? She asked. I found it, in the walls of the hospital. You left it. For me. She was quiet for a long time. Then her voice dropped. They said I was dangerous. You weren't. They said I needed to forget. But you didn't. She looked at him again. Longer this time. Then slowly, she lifted a trembling hand to his cheek. Her palm was warm. You have his eyes? She whispered. Julian smiled, eyes wet. Yeah, I do. And for the first time in 14 years, his mother began to cry. They gave him an hour. In that hour, Teresa didn't remember much. Not names, not places, not everything he had hoped. But fragments came. The smell of cinnamon bread. The laugh of a child. Ellie, maybe. A gold bracelet she used to wear but no longer had. She couldn't hold full memories. But she could feel. And Julian knew that was enough. For now. When he stood to leave, she gripped his hand. Will you come again? She asked. He nodded. I'll come every day. Outside, Morgan leaned against the SUV, watching the trees sway. Julian joined her in silence. Tillman stayed back, speaking softly into her headset. She knew you, Morgan said. Part of her did. That's more than most get. He nodded. A long silence passed. Then Morgan spoke again. They're shutting down B4 and Black Level. Full investigation. Federal Julian exhaled slowly. It's too late for the others. Not for the ones still out there. He looked at her. There are more, he said. She said so. In the notes, the tapes, the codes in the locker. We'll find them. Julian turned to the trees beyond the facility. His heart felt cracked open, but not broken. For the first time in years, he didn't feel lost. He felt found. 6 months later, Julian stood in a small conference room in D.C. Behind him, a slideshow projected evidence. Photos of the sublevels, voice recordings, personnel rosters, and excerpts from erased files. In front of him sat a committee. Oversight press, advocates, a handful of survivors. He spoke clearly, not as a technician, not even as a victim, but as a son. I thought my mother had abandoned us, that she chose to disappear, but she didn't. She was taken, silenced, rewritten. He paused. She fought to hold on to the truth, and I found it because she believed someone would. He placed the photograph on the table. My mother survived. Others didn't, but now, finally, we speak for them.